the focus will be on you.
So it's being live streamed. Okay. All this technology is something I'm relearning or learning for the first time to how to cope with it.
I'm waiting for the text and I'll get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, the 8th webinar in the Sephardic Mizrahi Jewish Speaker Series. We truly appreciate the organizations supporting this series. Thank you to all of them. They include Congregation BINA, a community of Jews from India, Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, CIJR, Bet Raim, Senegal, Lodza Center Congregation, Kulanu, Canada, Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, CILR, Jews Against Anti-Semitism, Canada, the United Grassroots Movement, the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, CAEF, and Bet Tikva Synagogue. As many of you know, Alan Herman of CIJR and I work together on securing speakers and making all the arrangements for these presentations. But there is no way that we could possibly do this on our own. So we would like to acknowledge and thank Rajivan Veerasingham for his invaluable technical assistance in getting this webinar to you. Thanks also to Ariella Daniels for designing the flyer for us. She always does such a great job. This evening's presentation is being recorded and will be available to all who registered in a few days. Please check your junk mail or your spam folder, as this email will be sent to you by Congregation BINA. Please make sure you enter your questions in the chat, and following the presentation, we will proceed with a question and answer or Q&A session. Following Rivka Campbell's presentation on the Jews of Jamaica in January of this year, we received many messages asking us to find a speaker who was born and raised in Jamaica to speak on this important subject. We listened, and today it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Ainsley Henriques, who was born, raised, and still resides in Jamaica. Ironically, and not by design, our focus this evening has a thematic connection to the Toronto Caribbean Carnival, which is on this weekend. Getting back to Ainsley and his many, many accomplishments, I have to say that for over 40 years, Ainsley has worked tirelessly to preserve the rich history and traditions of Jamaica's unique Jewish community. He is a descendant and Jewish activist from generations of Jews who started to migrate to Jamaica after its capture by the English in 1655. His ancestry has descended from Portuguese Jews fleeing Portugal after the Reformation, after the Reformation, when Jews were allowed, or conversos were allowed, to settle in Holland and were allowed to return to practice Judaism. The Jews who could eventually fled to Jamaica. He traces one root of his ancestry in Jamaica to Raphael Cohen Belinfante, a Hebrew teacher who arrived on the island from Amsterdam in 1745. Ainsley's interest in Jewish history was started by his mother's family and stirred by his stepfather's stories of serving in World War II in the Middle East and North Africa. He left for university in Britain, and there he learned of the horrors of the Holocaust. and he was there during the Suez Canal crisis. Returning to Jamaica, he joined the United Congregation of Israelites. He was elected to the board of the congregation and became the president in 1980. He went on to serve in B'nai B'rith and became vice president for the movement in the 10 countries of the Caribbean and Central America. He founded the Jamaica Jewish Genealogical Society and established practices for anyone interested in finding their family history. He and his wife created the Jewish Museum for Jamaica, and it was opened for the 350th anniversary of the Jewish settlement in Jamaica. He also founded, along with his associate, Professor Jane Gerber, a very important conference that included many Jewish historians and experts on the Caribbean American Jewish history. This was held in Kingston in 2010. He worked for years with other associate, Rachel Frankel, and the many volunteers who visited and cataloged all the Jewish graves on the island. Today, he is also the honorary counsel for Israel. His main mentor for many years was the late Israeli ambassador, Mordechai Arbel, with whom he had a very close relationship. Ainsley has also worked tirelessly for several non-Jewish interests for the island over many years. He has been appointed and served on many government companies and boards. Of particular importance has been his service as chairman of the National Heritage Trust for multiple terms and as chairman of the Norman Washington Manley Foundation. Henriques founded the Jamaican Export Trading Company to market Jamaican goods such as pimento, local produce, limestone, garments, and gypsum abroad. He sat on the World Spice Council, introduced plum tomatoes to Jamaica, manufactured all the woodwork for the first major conference center downtown, and created the country's first agro-park system. He was honored by the Jamaican government with the Commander of Distinction Award. He is proud of his 3 daughters and 7 Jewish grandchildren, and is now waiting, he says, for their contribution to his legacy, which is to provide him with his great-grandchildren. I hope you all are listening. We are thrilled to have you as our speaker today, Ainsley. I will turn it over to you now. The floor is yours.
Well, the answer for all of that is just a 3-letter word. Wow, that was me? I can't believe you. I think I better go home and go to bed. But thank you very much for that explanation and exposition. And it has been a pleasure not to do what I have done, but to be able to work with so many wonderful people over these many years, to be able to have achieved, not by myself, but with their collaboration, cooperation. And that's in fact the message I think I want to share. And it's a pleasure to have listened to Rivka and to have you also bring me back into the picture for a slightly different texture of what I have experienced over these years. I nearly said many years, but I think maybe if I live as long as my mother, I still have quite a few years to go. So that's part of my story. You got it right. You got everything I think right in the fact that I come from a deep history with a Belinfanti family. And I could tell you the first quick story is that I know that the famous singer whose first name was Belinfanti became Belafonte. And as a result of that, once when we met, he said to me, but Ainsley, I know that we were cousins. So yes, he could sing and I can't. So that's another part of my story. But we won't go there. What we have is a story that you quite rightly identified of us fleeing from inquisitions and places where Jews were not welcome to stay. My grandmother's story, my mother's story much later in the world, in the 1890s, was a woman from a village in Ukraine, and I'm glad she didn't stay because it's terrible there now. But she left Shepetovka with her mother and ended up in Philadelphia, and then met my grandfather, and that's a whole nother story. Yes, I am quarter Ukrainian. So in one other sense, I sometimes claim that I am Catholic con leche, that is Sephardic with Ashkenazi mixed in. That's my way of describing it in Spanish. So we have a background from that kind of exposure. She lived up into her late 90s, of what it was like to become or to practice Ashkenazi religious beliefs, because she was from a very Orthodox Ashkenazi family, or on the other hand, what were Sephardic belief systems in the history of the last, what should we say, 200 years or more, and without the orthodoxy of a Sephardic religion that was practiced in the depth that it should and could have been. As you get into the islands like the Caribbean, it's difficult to be able to do a lot of things that the Sephardim were able to do in communities in the Middle East in particular, one of which was keep kashrut. So it's part and parcel of a background, but recognizing that we were Jews, recognizing that in the Caribbean, and in particular in Jamaica, we were never despised in a very real sense. And today, I'm proud to tell you that Jamaica has no overt anti-Semitic outbursts or placements, and it's an extraordinarily wonderful place to be able to live as a Jew and to recognize those of us who are from Jewish families, and to recognize, even more interestingly, many Christians who have Jewish ancestry. So that's part and parcel of what happened in Jamaica over the past 350 odd years. It has happened over my lifetime. It's also quite fascinating because we came here, as you were able to understand, when England became allowing Jews to settle not only in Jamaica, but also in England for the first time since 1290. And we were allowed to settle here in England in 1656. And part of the reason is very interesting. It's not a well-known story. It's a story of Cromwell, who took over the monarchy and became a friend of Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel from Amsterdam. And as a result of that relationship, that's how Jews were allowed to come back into settling in England, and were allowed to go to Jamaica to be able to find a place where they could live in safety. That we were given Jamaican citizenship? No. We were there as, I'm not quite sure exactly what the status of us was, but certainly we were not fully recognized to be able to participate in all aspects of Jamaican life from 1656 until 1831. And at the same time, we were also parceled with the people who of African ethnicity were brought to Jamaica and became freed from enslavement, and they too got the same freedoms that we got in 1831. So yes, we had a connection with what we call the free Africans, and that's an interesting aspect of it, because in that sense, we were part and parcel of how we both grew in the economy of Jamaica, and that took on the role until after we were allowed to become English citizens, and that took place later. What was interesting was that we became primarily in the early days of our settlement, became merchants. We opened shops across the island wherever people were settling. And in those days, of course, the major activity in Jamaica was the plantation system, which was growing sugar for Europe, in particular for England. So I could continue on this story, but I think at this stage, I'm sure there's a question or two that you want to put to me. So I'll stop for the moment. No? No questions? And no? Okay.
Ainsley, we will do the questions at the end of your presentation.
Well, okay, let me just
okay.
because So as a result of the changes that took place, we were eventually allowed to become active in the Jamaican Jewish community. And after the 1831 exercise, and even up until 1962, we were then considered as British subjects. I left Jamaica for argument's sake in 1950s to go to England to study, and I went as an English subject, right? And not as citizens were not what we were called subjects. And so until 1962, when Jamaica became independent, I then became a Jamaican citizen. So that's part of my quick story. What I think was interesting is that when we started settling in Jamaica, the first settlement and the first synagogue was built in the famous or infamous town of Port Royal, which was on the edge of the Kingston Harbor, the end of the gate, the entry to Kingston Harbor, which is in fact quite interestingly the seventh largest natural harbor in the world. And that was part of the reason why England was so interested in capturing Jamaica, because they could have a place to be able to attack the Spanish shipping that was carrying the gold and silver from the silver and gold mines of Central and South America. Part of their concern was the building up of Spanish wealth that could again finance an armada to attack the English England and take over England. The fact that they didn't succeed in the first instance is an interesting story. I'm sharing it very briefly with you. The Spanish Armada was attacked by a storm and blown out of the English Channel up into the North Sea. So I think God had a hand in it. And certainly I don't think it had very much to do with the English naval capabilities. So they never were able to take on England at that time. I don't know if the Spanish were still afraid of the divine information that would be attacking them, but they never continued to do with the Armada program that we know of. So let's moving on quickly. As a result of Cromwell, and he didn't last very long because the monarchy was restored, and the good news was that Charles II decided to allow the continuation of the Jews settling in England and in the what became the English colonies. So as a result of that, we were able to sit here and build our connections throughout, not only Jamaica, but again, interestingly, throughout England and through, to a certain extent, through Holland. Because as you know, neither England nor Holland actually was practicing Catholicism by those days. So this is all part of a story, we know. But however, those that settled in Jamaica were mainly people who came to Jamaica for the purposes of growing sugarcane. Sugarcane was the major commodity that Europe needed. And we could argue that the history of sugar is very, very interesting. Before sugarcane, the major sweetener in Europe was honey. As a result of understanding the growing of sugarcane in the Mediterranean and the expansion of that into islands like Madeira and the use of African labor in those islands, in that part of the world, resulted in England determining that the answer to growing sugarcane was in fact to capture Africans, to buy African people and bring them into the Caribbean as enslaved persons. And so the Caribbean became a major source of the activity of the Dutch and the English to a large extent to be able to capture and bring Africans into the Caribbean. Cuba similarly, but they tended to buy slaves from the Dutch, and particularly they were not major capturers or purchasers of African enslavement, but they were large resources of enslaved persons took place in those Caribbean, in those Spanish countries. So now what does that bring us back to? It brings us back to the fact that in what was basically a Protestant country, and the right to continue to practice Judaism as we wished was really quite fascinating. We ended up with, over time, a number of synagogues in Jamaica. The main capital of Jamaica after the Colon Exposition of 1494 And then he ended up in Jamaica in 1490, in 1503, and where he lived for a year. We call him the long stay tourist, for the first long stay tourist that we had in the island. Was it a good thing? I'm not sure. But he eventually was able to leave in 1494. He was taken to the Dominican Republic, and he didn't really have much to do with the idea of plantocracy, because their role was primarily looking for mineral wealth, and Jamaica did not, and could not find any gold of any significance to keep either the Spanish or Colon here. So that was another story. The English came eventually, and the whole business of the plantocracy grew and developed, and England and Haiti became the major sugar producers for Europe in the 17th century. So it's a very interesting story, because before that, it was Brazil was where originally the concept of growing sugar started, when people were brought from Africa to Brazil. But of course, the journey from Brazil to Europe is a much longer journey than the journey from the Caribbean. So sugar became a major crop for Jamaica, and of course, a major source of its labor came from enslaved persons. Thank God we're over that today. And of course, the majority of our people today are descendants, to a large extent, of people who were enslaved and their descendants subsequently. So yes, do we have members of the former African enslaved persons as people within our Jewish community? Yes, color has never been an issue for us. And so that part of our belief system is that we were able, more recently than before, to convert one or two people who really wish to become Jews. And if you come to our services today, our choir and those that help to conduct the service are not, I would say, let me put it bluntly, not pure white. And that's a very now interesting story, because I have to now probably expose myself. I happen to have fallen in love with a very lovely woman whose father was Chinese and her mother was part African. So she became the first real convert. So from a non-Jewish, non-white, non-whatever you want to call it, background. And so I'm very happy to tell you that she was really well recognized, and I was a very happy man until she died. So that's another story. Then of course I married again with a woman who is, I put it in another context, is halachically Jewish, because she descends from a Jewish woman who married into a non-Jewish family, or married into not married a non-Jewish husband, and in the fourth generation, she's still a descendant of a maternal line from her great-great-grandmother, who was originally a Jewish woman. So yes, it's part of the mix that we have, and I share it with you because I think it's quite interesting when you think about what we have gone through in the world, to be able to determine who is Jewish and who is not Jewish, and why you are not Jewish, and how can you become Jewish. And we have, I think, to a large extent, been able to overcome many of those problems, not necessarily the way that some disciples of Judaism would, I use the word disciple inappropriately perhaps, of Judaism, who would wish Judaism to continue. But since I come from from an Orthodox Jewish family.
Sorry to jump in, Ainsley. I'm so sorry to jump in. This is Alan Herman,
Oh,
CIGR co-chair. Would you be able to speak a bit louder? We're getting some feedback that people are having difficulty hearing you.
Okay, no, I will move a little closer to the microphone. I'm now only about 6 inches away. Is that better? Are you hearing me?
Let's move with that. If I get other comments, I will check in again. But thank you. And
okay,
just
my volume is at highest level, and I'm within about 6 inches of the screen. I can't get much closer. And I don't know whether
thank you for whatever you're able to do. Thank you.
That's about as close as I can get. So hopefully I'll speak a little bit louder if I can, and go back to the point where I was making the point that really the question of racism in Judaism in Jamaica is not an issue. Belief is an issue to a certain extent because it's not the easiest thing to convert to Judaism. It takes time, and you have to it takes study. And at the same time, it requires at the end of the study to have a rabbinical investigation into your belief system before you can actually become recognized as a Jew. So yes, that's part of what we have to recognize even today. You just don't come into the synagogue just to practice Judaism and to become a Jew unless you go through the process of that we have still in place to be able to recognize and accept a person to become a Jew or Jewess. So that's really one of the stories I think is important. So what we're talking about here is the fact that most of us that came to Jamaica as Jews fled from places where we were no longer safe. Today it's known as anti-Semitism. Today it's known as pogroms. Today it's known as all sorts of other issues that have taken place over centuries to be able to say that Jews don't belong. Don't belong where? Don't belong where they live? No, please. And so it's a bad scene. Today in Jamaica, we are blessed because of maybe the work of our forebears. We are recognized and accepted everywhere in Jamaica. Not a problem. We're accepted to visit in a church. We're accepted even the Christians to visit with us in our synagogue and whilst we are conducting our services. So we have difficulties, with the exception, of course, of my own experience, where if you marry a non-Jew, then it's not easy to convert. So what happens is that the majority of those who married with a non-Jew became Christian. So we lost a lot of our membership. And today we are losing members because of another reason. We are losing members because of the ease of being able to get into the United States for people to do study and to seek jobs afterwards because of the opportunities that are much more widely available to them there. And I, as a result of that, have lost 3 of my 3 daughters. One now actually has now converted to living in Portugal and became a Portuguese citizen. She said, "Daddy, I've gone home." I said, "Well, I don't know about that, but I know your home is still in Jamaica. That's where you were born." So it's another story altogether. So I can continue with this story based on the fact that if we're still a very safe place for people of Jewish persuasion practice to be able to live, which is not the normal practice that exists in many parts of the world today. And so we're very blessed to be able to continue that aspect of what we did when our ancestors fled and were able to come to Jamaica. And we don't have to flee from where we are here. We only have to go to find other opportunities and still know that Jamaica is a home we can live in. So that goes without saying. The fact that we practice Judaism in a diminishing community is becoming a major problem for us and for other communities in the Caribbean and even in Central America, where they've been able to be allowed to live subsequently. So that is a very real difficulty, and the future is not going to be easy to overcome because the migrations to Jamaica is one thing, but then the strength of the religious fraternity in Christianity is another aspect of it. So if only one Jew marries into a Christian family and becomes Christian, is he likely or she likely to bring the Christians over into Judaism? And it's not happening, and it is unlikely to have it happen. So is there a future for a Jewish community in Jamaica? Hopefully it will continue, and hopefully it will continue beyond my lifetime. And so that's all I can do, to hope and pray. One of the aspects of it, however, though, is that you heard the statement from Anne that we have created a Jewish museum in Jamaica. And one of the things that I think is important is that even if we have no longer a practice of Judaism in Jamaica, that we are able to prove to everybody that there was such a thing as an active Jewish community in Jamaica. You only have to look at the people who were part of our government, part of our professional system, part of all sorts of other aspects of Jamaican life, that these were Jews. And we did participate fully in the Jewish community, not only in the Jewish community, but in the civil community. Our first ambassador to the United States was a very highly recognized Jewish lawyer. That's quite a fascinating experience. And Jamaica sent that person to the United States as our first ambassador. So this continues. I personally still am privileged to be able to sit on the Commonwealth Jewish Council, which of course Canada is a member. So in that sense, yes, we do have an international relationship because of the fact that we are part of the Commonwealth, and we're not disallowed to be able to be part of the Commonwealth because we are a Jewish community. Is also an important aspect when you look at what is happening and only have to read the news every day to find out what the grief is that exists around the world. Can I continue? Yes. One of the interesting things about living as a Jew in a country like Jamaica is, in fact, that having settled in various towns and villages across the island, we had at one stage something like 21 Jewish cemeteries. Because if you die or your family dies, a member of your family dies, to be able to take a horse and a buggy and drive the body to the cemetery in say, the city, the major capital city, it could take all day. It's not an experience that you necessarily want to have to undertake. So small cemeteries were created close to villages and towns across the island. One of the things which we did over the last 15 years was to be able to catalog all the recorded graves or cemetery records of the various graves that existed. Some were destroyed because they're so small that, you know, it's just impossible to maintain them. So before my time, most those couple of those were given up, so to speak. In fact, one in particular in the western end of the island, I think has a house built in it. It doesn't belong to anything Jewish at all. And only about 4 grave markers are left, but we did record those. One of the interesting parts of it was also the fact that when Jews settled in Port Royal and not on the mainland of Jamaica, there was a small synagogue that was founded there before the major earthquake of 1692. And those persons that lived there had to find a place where they could dig a grave deep enough to be able to place the casket and the bodies. And we found that place with the earliest grave marker of 1672. And of course, that was quite a long time ago. And we were been able to record every marker that is there. We think more are there simply because of the fact that as not everybody was able to afford a stone marker. And if it was a wooden marker, then the likelihood that would have been rotted or disappeared. So we think that there are more graves there, but that requires possibly a different type of technology, which we haven't yet determined to use. So 1672 as a major cemetery on the coast, the northern coast of the Kingston Harbor became an important aspect of the kind of work we have done to be able to recognize our history as a Jewish people. We still have one cemetery ruin in Spanish Town, the capital, which goes back, believe it or not, to goes back to, 1704. 1704 was a major cemetery, a synagogue built in Spanish Town. Only the underground ruins are left. Because it was damaged not by a hurricane, but by an earthquake in 1907. And it was given up, and then of course it no longer exists other than a couple of stones that show from through the earth. It would be lovely to have it restored because it was a magnificent synagogue from the pictures we have. And I say pictures, yes, because photography came to Jamaica believe it or not, in 1845. And so we do have pictures of some pictures of that particular synagogue. So that's a whole nother story of the role that we had in a major British colony, being able to attract people like the photographer that came here in the mid 1800s, and so on and so forth. So it's nice to be able to live in a country in which don't have to dig too deep to find a history of our Jewish people, and to be able to find our role in the society when we were first elected to the government, when we became major players in the field of law and medicine, when we became active in politics even. And so I'm very proud to say that Jamaica is a place that I've been very comfortable living in, and I won't tell you for how long, but a long enough time. And happy to be able to have the respect to be able to participate, not just in Judaism, which I've been privileged to do around the world, but also to participate in Jamaican civil life in all aspects, including what I think is still one of the more amazing stories of my life, is to become a white Jew in charge of a Black heritage Christian country. So that was a very real and fascinating challenge. And I think I did my best to make it work for most of us. I could continue and talk for a long time because there's so much about my life living and working in the Caribbean with other Jewish communities, in Curacao, in Barbados, in Panama, in Costa Rica, and being part and parcel of the various disciplines that each of them practiced and their histories, because Curacao is actually an older community than us. And I was privileged to be there for their 350th anniversary, and to have been in a synagogue where the candle lighting was only light in the synagogue. 800 candles were lit for that service on that evening. And it was something that I can see now, talking to you, in my mind's eye as one of the more outstanding teachers of my Jewish life. And so that is part of the story. It has nothing to do just only with reading the book and saying the prayers. It has to do with the friendships that one has been created, and the relationships that one has appreciated, and the policies that one has been able to practice to be able to make sure that our Judaism is recognized and respected, and so is the fact that everybody else is. And I will leave you with one last thought. A few years ago, a gentleman decided that he wanted to come to Jamaica. He wanted to see where his father had come from. And then he sent a message to say he would like to attend synagogue. And the conversation was carried forward. And I was very privileged, I think, I'd say the word privileged, to invite and have Louis Farrakhan attend a Sabbath service with me in the synagogue. Did it make him less anti-Semitic? I won't argue that case, but I do know that we had an extraordinarily interesting morning together, and he appreciated it. I've seen him twice since, and we both respected the visit of each other. So that's a whole story that I don't particularly want to dwell on anymore, but it's to say that even with the most outstanding anti-Semites in America, I was privileged to have his recognition of the fact that I am a Jew. God bless you all.
Ainsley, all I can say is I'm amazed at the amount of information that you have about the Jewish community in Jamaica. Your information seems to be endless. Alan and I have had many, many talks with you, and every time you have surprised us with new information. So I know it's not possible to put it all into this short period of time, but I hope that you will write a book and that you will record your life story and put in as much information as you can, because that would be so very valuable to everybody in the years to come. On behalf of Alan, myself, and all our supporting organizations, thank you. So now we are going to move on to the question and answers, okay? And I will read you the questions and you can answer, and I'll do it in the order in which they came in. The first question that came in is, Ainsley, are you related to the pirate of the same name?
Well, I have a late friend whose name was Eddie Kritzler. And Eddie wrote the book, The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean.
Mhm.
And he wrote it, much of it in my house, because he came to Kingston, he would stay in my house.
Mhm.
And my wife used to say to him, Eddie, if you don't finish a chapter, you're not going to get breakfast. I don't know if that's the reason. I don't know if that's the reason why he thought that maybe I was related to the Henriques of Brazil, who was the supposed pirate of the Caribbean.
Okay.
He used the word supposed because Eddie, with all his effort to try to make sure he had breakfast, was not able to convince me that he was a pirate.
Thanks, Ainsley. Okay. Harvey has asked if you're related. Yeah, that was from Harvey, but now there's another one from a Mike. What is the website for the Jewish Museum of Jamaica? How do we look it up? What is the website? Do you know the website?
Yeah. The Jewish community of Jamaica today is called the United Congregation of Israelites. And the reason
United
is,
Congregation of Israelites. Okay.
first settlers here were basically Sephardi. And they mainly came what we estimate, I came from either Holland or through England,
Mhm.
settling Jamaica. Okay. And so that's where my ancestry comes from. My Henriques ancestry comes from.
Mhm.
What is interesting is that my Jewish ancestor married a woman by the name of Sarah Franks.
Mhm.
And the question came up yesterday only, believe it or not, is she a relation of Anne Frank? But Anne Frank is a Frank, not a Frank.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I was related, but I do happen to have had, with the Chabad rabbi here, we were able to put on, and this is an interesting story. We were able to put on a story by Eva Schloss, who is Anne Frank's stepmother.
Mhm.
Only had 2,000 people turn up for that interview. Only 2,000. It was an amazing experience. But
Okay.
so many Jamaicans were fascinated by the understanding of the story of Anne Frank. So yes, but I'm not related to Anne Frank, I don't think. But on the other hand, the Franks were a very wealthy family that settled in New York. And I suspect that they also were involved. We do know that they were involved in a sugar plantation in the eastern tip of the island. And I do believe that my great grandmother was a daughter of of the family that had interest in that particular plantation. And I am a genealogist, so I do have to do a little bit more work to find out exactly how I'm related to the Frank family.
The Frank family.
Then I'm no longer a Sephardim with only a grandmother from the Ukraine, but I'm also a Sephardim with a great grandmother from Germany.
Mhm. Okay.
That leads us to the story that I wanted to get to. The story I wanted to get to is that we did eventually end up with an English and German congregation in Jamaica in the late 1700s. As a
Okay.
result of that, it became important that we be able to merge. And so that merger took place exactly 100 and I think 3 weeks ago. And I was privileged to speak at the 100th anniversary of the United Congregation, no longer the English and German or the Sephardic congregation, but the United Congregation. So we today, what did we unite to do? I think there's only one prayer that was actually introduced into the Sephardic Siddur, which was from the English and German congregation. Because primarily, much of what we practice comes out of the Bevis Marks Gaster prayer book system. So that is part of our history.
Okay.
And whilst they have it down in, I think, as a reform congregation, the question is, what is reform? Yes, we do have women as equal members of the Aliyah of Torah. And we took that in when I was president. So I don't think that I was actually the person that I can blame for that, but or congratulate for that. Well, you know, there are two sides to every story. So that's part of it. But it took place when I was president by virtue of the wardens who took the decision that we shouldn't now. We were getting the congregation was diminishing, and we needed to make sure that we had included all the women. So that was something I have not been, never ruled against. I'm part of the agreement. So that's
So if a person wants to look up the museum, they could just look up United Congregation of Israelites.
you want to look at anything about the Jewish community in Jamaica. The United Congregation of Israelites has about 8 or 10 different programs on Google.
On
Right
Google.
there, on Google.
Okay.
And
So the Jewish Museum is listed?
I beg your pardon?
The Jewish Museum is listed under that?
It's in the buildings of the congregation in
Okay.
the synagogue. Now that it actually has a video on it,
Mhm.
I think to my regret, when I looked it up this morning, I didn't see a video of it. And I will
Okay.
tell the new president that if you don't put my video up there of my museum, because it's my wife and myself that built it, I'm going to be very upset. I might stop
No.
paying my dues.
No, but it should be there because I think people would like to look it up.
Yes.
Okay, so that's something you could keep in mind.
I want to make people understand that the use of the word museum is not something that I'm involved with this type of business over my years in other aspects of Jamaican life.
Mhm.
And I'm building another one at the moment
Mhm.
for my sins. It's not just putting artifacts in a place to tell the story. It's
Right.
also telling the story and questioning what can be done with the story as a future aspect of how we practice what the
Okay.
story tells us.
Right.
So it has different aspects to it. It's not a place and it's not a society that is going to trek through a museum to look at artifacts.
Okay.
It's a society, and we are not either in a place where we have Jewish tourists. Now, Jewish tourists do come in thousands to Jamaica, but they all go to the North Coast, and we are
Right.
on the East Coast. So as a capital city, as where most of the Jews live, this is not an easy place for, as yet, for visitors to Jamaica, Jewish visitors to Jamaica, to schlep to.
Okay. Since you mentioned Torahs, are the Torahs encased like the Sephardic Torahs are, or are they not?
I think we have 15.
50. Okay.
About 4 or 5 of them are not kosher anymore.
Okay.
I don't think anybody has the courage to take them and have a burial service.
Okay. Are they in cases?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, they are. Okay, so they look like the Sephardic Torahs. Okay.
They're not encased in metal wooden cases.
No,
They're
yeah.
in cloth cases.
Oh, just the cloth. Okay. One of the questions from Rivka is, where do the bulk of Jews live in Jamaica?
Today, Kingston.
Ruth has asked, yes. Where do they live? In Kingston?
Yeah.
So that's where the bulk of the Jews live.
Yeah.
All right.
Not that many now, but one of the things which we do have, and we were able to build about 30 years ago, more than that, 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, a Hillel Academy, named Academy, which is a major primary and secondary school system, but it's not a free school system. It's not a government school system, but it is probably considered to be the most important and influential school system for people in Jamaica today. And so it's known as the Hillel Academy, and it's an extraordinarily very successful institution with nearly 800 students in it.
Wow.
So
all right.
Our contribution is not just in Judaism, but
yes, it's across the board. Okay. Yeah, someone says that they would like an overview of daily Jewish life in Jamaica. Are there regular services at the synagogues? Do you have a minyan? Is there kashrut observed? And what is Jamaica's relationship with the state of Israel? So that's one question. So let's start with the daily Jewish life.
No, we are privileged to be able to continue to have Friday night services and Saturday morning services.
Okay, so that's one.
On all the various holidays.
Right, so you do have a minyan.
We don't have a minyan.
You don't have a minyan?
Not that often anymore.
Not that often anymore. Okay.
Morning. That is really the biggest problem.
That's tough, yes. And kashrut?
No, that hasn't been around since I was a boy. And that's around.
Okay, all right.
But there hasn't been a shochet
Okay,
in many years.
for
My
many.
father's father came
Mhm.
from Damascus,
Mhm.
and my stepfather's father was his own shochet.
Uh-huh.
He kept
Okay,
kosher. He kept
okay.
um there was another family that had a member of that family that also kept kashrut or was his own shochet. But
Yes,
not
okay.
that he was either going to sell it or share it. One of the interesting things today
Mhm.
is that we have a Chabad rabbi in Montego Bay.
Mhm.
Very good friend of mine. I'm not afraid of the Chabad rabbis.
Mhm.
They don't frighten me. They're not.
Okay. All right. So they must have kashrut.
You can get kosher food from him because he imports his kosher meat
Yes.
from.
Okay. Okay. So it's available to some extent.
These are available now much more frequently and much
Frequently.
easier
Okay.
than they have been in most of my.
In the past. All right.
I'll give you
Okay.
another very interesting
Okay.
is that during Pesach, during the war,
Uh-huh.
we didn't get matzah. We
Ah.
made cassava wafers.
Okay. All
So
right. You had to make do.
accommodated or
Mhm.
keep our practice alive. In my family, we made fast cassava wafers. which of
Cassava
course
wafers.
are
Okay.
unleavened.
Unleavened bread. Yes. Yes. All right. Now, the last question there in that from that individual is Jamaica's relationship with the state of Israel.
Well, I think I'm probably better than most people to answer that. I really don't know. No, that's not true. I've been 20. I think I've been
With the
on
consul?
about 25 years.
Yeah, for 25 years. And so,
I've known every Israeli ambassador to Jamaica over our 60 years. So I'm privileged in that sense. In fact, the last time I was in Israel, I had lunch with the first Israeli ambassador that came to Jamaica. Jamaica recognizes right of Israel. It hasn't got a problem. We've been able to keep our prime ministers under control. We do not allow them to take positions which are anti-Israeli or anti-Jewish.
Jewish,
So
okay.
part of it is that we've been able to keep them well organized, and they know who I am, so that's not a
So
problem.
that's not a problem. So more power to you.
I'm living it out.
Okay. Rivka wants to know if anyone has any information on families Magnus or De Leon. Do you know?
Well, let me put it this way. Because of my marriage and the fact that my children are of mixed ancestry and mixed ethnicity, not mixed Jewish practice, but otherwise, I thought it was important when I was able to find
Ainsley, speak closer to the mic so we can understand what
when
you're
I was able to find the documentation to be able to use a computer technology for genealogy, I became a genealogist. And as a result of that, I have tens of thousands of names in my database. And I am in touch with both Ton and David Mendoza from the early start of the Sephardic world. And apart from anything else, billions, yes, by the dozens. If Rivka wants any information, I'm more than willing to have her write to me personally.
Okay.
One of the other aspects of it is that my wife says I'm the stupidest man she ever decided to marry because I don't charge for my genealogical work.
Okay. So this is, I'm just making a note of the name and I will look up and see if we have her email. And then I will send, can I send her your email address?
Of course. If she doesn't have it, she's the only woman I know that doesn't have it.
Okay. Okay. What percentage of Jamaicans have Jewish DNA then?
We estimate that somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 Jamaicans have Jewish DNA.
Okay.
400,000. We're looking at somewhere in the region of about 10% of the present living in Jamaica population. But if we take the overall population, because we've migrated quite widely over the years, we probably 5 to 7% of the population have a Jewish DNA.
Okay.
That's a guess. That's a guess.
That's a guess. Yeah. There's one question here. from a George Kennedy. He says, "Hi, Ainsley. Great to see you tonight. You have a lot of info about the Jews who left Spain, Italy, and Portugal at the time of the Inquisition."
I have not done any work on the
No.
Inquisition, on the Inquisition test,
Mhm.
court cases or testing.
Mhm.
I mean, the auto de fe is a test of faith. That's
Mhm.
what it means. And I really haven't done any of that. I really have taught my genealogy and not even gone back to Amsterdam. In fact, I'm thinking of talking to David Mendoza, to myself, to be able to see if he has any evidence as to where my grandfather, great grandfather came from. We think it's in Amsterdam, but again, we don't know exactly. I've had some other work done maybe 10, 15 years ago. And of course, the name Henriques was not the original name that they used, obviously, because what Henriques really is nothing more than the son of Henry, and the first king of Portugal was Henriques. So yes, am I descended from royalty? I would hope so.
You do know. Okay, there are some other friends who've said hello. Both Shura and Kani have said hello.
Okay.
Okay, they are both listening. Do you daven and put on tefillin? Is another question.
I do use tefillin because my friend, the Chabad rabbi, whenever he comes to visit me, says, "Ainsley," and I said, "Yes, put it on."
Okay.
But I thought I was not bar mitzvahed with the use of tefillin.
Okay.
I have used it when I was in England because one of the interesting aspects of my life was that one of the people who was very friendly with my stepfather's mother when she was living in Jamaica in a camp here, her family, became my home in England when I went to live in England for 5 years.
Yes.
And she was also a member of an Orthodox Jewish community. And in fact, her husband, I used to go with her husband to an Orthodox Ashkenazi community in Highgate, where the only service was taken in Hebrew. Yes. What was I doing there? Did I speak Hebrew? No, but the fact of the matter is that I've been exposed to all of these things, and I never failed to want or appreciate the exposure. So, but a couple of times I did put on a tefillin there because that was something that they were able to do. I have never put it on.
You never put it on. Okay, because the question is, do you all put it on Sephardic style or Ashkenazi style when you put on the tefillin? Because there's a difference.
Put on by Ashkenazi style.
It's been put on you by Ashkenazis. Okay. All right. Is there kosher food or kosher meat is the question. And I'm assuming not really, just the Chabad is providing some of it today. Is that correct?
Let me put it simply. I don't eat pork. Okay, that's my decision. Do I eat shrimp? Yes. But I don't eat pork. I don't eat bacon. I have eaten it in the past, but today I'm quite satisfied that my practice of kashrut is basically, I don't eat pork. And if I go to a place where I have to eat pork, I say, no, thank you.
All right. Okay. So the person that wanted to know about the Jewish Museum is asking me to find out from you if there is a website for the Jewish Museum, like www.
No. And I think that's my fault to a large extent, but I will try to see that we do something sensible and put it up. But there's a lot of information, even videos of Pesach, of Seders, of other activities in the Jewish community that can be found on that YouTube, or no, on that Google United
Congregation of Israelites. So if they Google United Congregation of Israelites, they'll find a lot of information there.
And what you've just advised me of is that we really should have.
You should have a website, yes. So perhaps when you do, you could send Alan and myself the website link, and we could share it at one point with all of our listeners at one of our presentations. Okay.
No, that's something I have to do.
Here's another question about the museum. Does the Jamaican Museum contain information about African Jews, Israelites that came to Jamaica via the slave trade?
No, it does not.
No. Okay.
It doesn't take anything really. It speaks much to what I just spoke about. It didn't take a position in racism.
Mhm.
It didn't take a position other than the fact that our Sephardim primarily came out of people who had fled Portugal.
Mhm.
We didn't attempt to try to do much any information on people who were able to escape from Spain, because if you didn't leave Spain by the time of the declaration of the fact that you were not allowed there anymore, you would have been put into you would have been burnt at the stake, put it bluntly. And so most of those people went back into the Mediterranean. And so there's very little an understanding of where if any of us came from Spain, if at all. We would not have come from Spain because we would not have been allowed in a Spanish country. And
Right.
Spain was in charge of Jamaica until 1665, 1655. So it was a the Colon family owned it. In fact, one of the interesting things of my life, and I'll share another story with you, is quickly. A descendant of Christopher Columbus came to Jamaica and we showed him what he's lost. I was present with taking him around Jamaica to show him what his family had lost. Lost Jamaica.
You lost Jamaica, yeah.
So that's
Okay.
part of the story. So the answer lies very much with those of us who fled, were conversos, who were allowed to flee after the 1580s, and were able to go into Portugal, into Holland, or eventually into England. So we returned to Judaism based on the return program of being able to meet with rabbis from Venice and from the Middle East to be able to bring us back into Judaism. So we didn't. I mean, it's not easy to tell a person, a Jew, a cousin or whoever, your ancestors were no longer Jewish. They became Catholic, and they returned to Judaism. I have no problem with it, because I understand it. But
Yes.
you think that you've been a long history of Jews from wherever, from the days in wherever. That's nonsense. It didn't work that way. A lot of conversos can return to Judaism.
Right.
That's
and there've been Ainsley, we've had so many. When the Jews were dispersed, we were dispersed all over the world. And today we are finding more and more pockets of people returning to Judaism, or who have practiced quietly some form of Judaism over the many, many, many years.
Exactly.
Okay. And so that is so true. I agree with you.
And I'm quite prepared to say it out loud.
Yes.
My great ancestors were in fact conversos who practiced Catholicism probably for 3 or 4 generations.
Yes.
Never lost the feeling that they wanted to return to Judaism.
Judaism.
But to go to places where Judaism was allowed to be practiced.
Correct. And that's become hard to find sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ainsley, Connie reminded me that your full name is Ainsley Cohen Henrique.
Ainsley Cohen, yes.
Right. I left out the Cohen. Okay. So on behalf of Alan, myself, and all our supporting organizations, and those on the webinar with us this evening, I want to say a heartfelt thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us. You have educated us about the history, culture, and traditions of the Jews of Jamaica. Thank you for being so honest and open. Thank you for all you have done to maintain and preserve the Jamaican Jewish community, along with their history, culture, and traditions, facilitating the process of tracing one's ancestry and identifying and marking the graves in the Jewish cemetery on the island are huge tasks, but are very essential for future generations. We are indebted to you for your enormous contributions and achievements, but both within and outside the Jewish community in Jamaica and beyond. Thank you, Ainsley, for all of that you have done in your lifetime.
Let's keep in touch. Bless you.
And we should keep in touch. Absolutely.
Shalom,
Okay.
shalom.
Shalom. A special thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening. Without you, we could not run these sessions. We do it so that we can educate a wider and wider community on all the various small Sephardic communities around the world. We hope to see you all at our next webinar, which we are planning for a Sunday in November. And we are hoping to have a speaker on the Jews of Curacao. In the interim, enjoy the rest of the summer and all our high holy days, which will be coming up at the end of September and into October. Hag Sameach to you all. Stay safe and healthy. Shalom and good night.